For the conference closing remarks, please welcome on stage the Director of Natural Capital of the Directorate General for Environment of the European Commission, Humberto Delgado Rosa.
Good afternoon. A big pleasure to be in my own city speaking about diversity when Lisbon is the green capital of the EU. And actually we are doing in the middle of a pandemic, it's getting worse, while the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 was approved amidst the pandemics in May. And I honestly think, and I'm proud to say it actually, that it's probably the most ambitious strategy on biodiversity that the world has ever seen. So we could ask ourselves, how come? How come we come to 2020 with the EU making the environment, biodiversity, climate also, of course, a big priority? Well, yesterday I've tried to find some inspiration on this question, seeing the latest film by David Attenborough that was already referred to today. By the way, this reminds me, once the British ambassador in Lisbon was telling me that in the UK, the order of hierarchy was God, there's Sir David Attenborough, then the Queen. So I thought to go to someone as close as God as possible to understand what happened. And a life in our planet that I've seen only yesterday is a very vivid testimony of an extraordinary life of 93 years, as you know, of someone that has really seen nature everywhere. And the reality it depicts is really sad. It actually made me sad because, you know, in these 60 years I have of life, grossly half of the nature that was back there in 1960 when I was born is now destroyed. As simple as that. So in a way, when we see these figures, 96% of vertebrate biomass nowadays on Earth is humans and livestock, 4% is all the rest, from elephants to seals to mice, or that 60% of wild populations of vertebrates have diminished or were lost in these last decades. It is really a sense of we heard it today also, a tragedy, a catastrophe. But it's not a catastrophe for the planet. The planet has endured worse than this in other mass extinctions. It just takes some millions of years to get biodiversity back, a different biodiversity. The issue is we don't really have millions of years to wait as humans, do we? So it is really a tragedy for humans. First and foremost, for the beauty, the wonder of this diversity that it offers so many of us. And for those of us, and I think I suffer a bit of that illness, which are born with a bit of biophilia, as Edward Wilson called it, that we do happen to like nature. It's a really tragedy just in itself to have a poorer world. But it's in fact, from another angle, and that was clearly explained today, it's a tragedy for humans from their strict interest and dependence of what nature provides, and cannot be provided by technology. We'll never have technology to provide us the water, the soil, the air, the food, the fiber that we depend on. So we should not at all take lightly this fact that our action in this planet brought us a lot of progress, but it was at the expense of the biosphere. And we depend on the biosphere. So there's something here really very wrong. And actually that was said today before in other forms. Natural capital, which is nature, if you want, biodiversity, water, soil, air, is the bedrock of our economy and of our society. Actually, and we've seen a slide today, I think it was Helena Freitas, this famous slide that depicts the Sustainable Development Goals in layers. So we learn from that graph that sustainable development is not composed of 3 pillars, no. It's composed of 3 layers, and there's only one candidate for the underlying layer of the other layers, and that's the biosphere, again, upon which you can build a society, upon which you can build an economy. So we will not be able to live and prosper without the full range of these services that ecosystems provide to us, and that were very clearly spelled out today, that from pollination to water, soil protection, the carbon cycle, flood control, and so forth. So the topic, this tragedy, it's essential for the economy to begin with. We have seen figures quoted today that came from the World Economic Forum, their analysis that over half of the world's GDP is directly or indirectly related to the services that nature provides, some $44 trillion of economic value generation. And also, I've seen with interest, the World Economic Forum comes every year with a global risk assessment. And year per year, biodiversity comes upper. Ecosystem collapse stands very high in the top 5 to nowadays, I think, a big risk for the economy. Not environmentalists saying, the economic sector saying. It's also, of course, and very obviously, essential for the climate. Yes, one of the drivers of biodiversity loss is climate change, but we cannot address climate change without the services that biodiversity provides to us. They are, yes, the same coin, or the two faces of the same coin. We need the carbon sink effect. We have a wonderful technology to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. It's called photosynthesis. It evolved during millions of years. I don't think we have nothing better in our laboratories to do it for us, unfortunately. And we also need biodiversity and nature to adapt to climate change and stand the impacts of extreme weather events. And with this said, of course, if it's essential for the economy, it's essential for the recovery. Any due recovery plan should have the word biodiversity inside. Go and check for your member state. So now we know that we are at risk of losing the productivity of agriculture, of forestry and fisheries from the sheer loss of biodiversity, not to mention, of course, the recreational, the touristic, the mental health benefits of having a thriving nature around us. And this was also spelled out today, which is it's essential for health, you know, because it's not only these pandemics that have an origin in the mismanagement of nature or in human encroachment in natural habitats and less wild populations that should buffer us against zoonotic diseases as COVID-19. We had others in the past. Ebola was one, SARS 2, etc. So more will come if we keep destroying nature. So in a way, you know, I think it was Roxholm in Sweden that said, for long nature has been buffering us against many impacts. Since the great acceleration that came in the 50s, we have imposed on it. Noticeably one example, oceans absorbing the heat. But nowadays, that buffering capacity is not exhausted, but invoices are coming. Coral bleaching, for instance, is one of them. So we are now facing the consequences more and more from loss of pollinators to reduced carbon, reduced fish stocks, or to the loss of forests everywhere. We are seeing these invoices coming. Now, one thing should also say, that's also in David Attenborough's film, doomsaying will not solve it out for us. If we all say this will all be a catastrophe, well, I go and grab a beer, don't I? What can I do? I need some message of hope for a political message or program to be valid. So is there an avenue of hope for biodiversity? Yes, there is. And my preferred word for it is called restoration. When we extinguish species, we won't get them back. But while they're not extinct, we can bring nature in quality and in quantity back. This is restoration. That we will have a UN decade of restoration, because it's indeed what can bring back nature into our lives. Or to use words of Attenborough again, making the world, and Europe, by the way, wilder again, because we have reduced too much of wilderness around us, and we need it. This is where I think the biodiversity strategy, the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030 is strong and meaningful and hopefully influentially for the global stage, because we aim to indeed protect more EU land and sea, up to 30%. This very difficult task that Enrique Miguel Pereira told us about, 10% strict protection, because science tells us not less is needed for us to allow room for nature to come back, including carbon-rich ecosystems as our remaining primary forests, wetlands, peatlands. We also want more quantification of our targets, and we will come next year with the first ever legally binding targets for nature restoration in the EU, quantified. We've heard about agriculture. Yeah, we want to reduce pressures in agriculture, reduce pesticides, excess fertilization. We want to bring back nature in the agricultural lands through more landscape features that were lost in many places in Europe. This will bring us back pollinators and reverse their decline. We want to look to the soil as an ecosystem and not as an amorph and passive entity out there that feeds us. We must restore soil as ecosystems. We need more quantity, quality, and resilience of our forests, as Portugal dramatically knows from the mega fires we face nowadays, including for mismanagement of the ecosystem to begin with, and also climate change. We need to reduce the pressures on the marine ecosystem, including from damaging fishing practices, and we need to restore ecosystems also in the ocean. We need to restore free-flowing rivers, as the biodiversity strategy suggests, including through removing barriers that in many rivers are there obsolete or doing more damage than good. We need to restore freshwater ecosystems. We need to green our cities. I will say a bit more on green cities in a moment. We need to reduce pollution to fight invasive alien species. We need nature-based solutions. That's only also for climate, but not only. In agriculture, agroecology is full of nature-based solutions. As I used to say, usually, some time ago when we would speak nature conservation, what would that sound to many people? Restriction is coming. Nowadays, it should sound, solutions are coming for you, for the problems we have meanwhile created ourselves. We need to engage business. And indeed, I'm impressed nowadays for the amount of big companies coming with commitments for biodiversity, also in view of a global deal that which we would get to in 2021. We need to scale up investments and to use the recovery as an opportunity. And a very important aspect that can be found in the biodiversity strategy in a small chapter, which is we need to measure and integrate the value of nature in decision-making, including through natural capital accounting. We take for granted values that are not so free as we think. On the cities, and again, Green Week in the green capital, Lisbon, that has done quite a lot already in greening itself. I see it also as a citizen. We all know that we are getting more urban and we will get more urban. And I've seen that can be seen from the angle of a threat, more artificialization of the world, but there's also an opportunity to grasp from us getting more urban, because in spite of that artificialization, first you can get the efficiency on management of waste, of water, of resources, of energy, and then you can make cities full of nature. There's a lot of nature in cities already nowadays. Natura 2000, you find it in European cities or very nearby. We have an enormous potential of win-win opportunities from greening the cities. And its urban dwellers happen to love nature, actually, because they don't have a lot of it. So if you think of green rooftops, green walls, and parks in the cities, that's one of the big bets that we will also want to bring in from these several benefits it can bring us. My final comments would come in this direction. It's very clear, I think, for anyone minimally informed that we need to take action on nature and biodiversity, to protect it, to restore it for our own sake, because there are many multiple interlinked benefits, jobs, raw materials, wealth, tackling climate change, enriching our lives, providing us food, protecting us from pandemics, and so forth. So it's really true that nature is our best ally, but we have been fighting it. We have not been working with nature. It's time to do it. Now I've seen some discussion, interesting discussion in all this day on how can we promote change? What can happen? There's first one thought I would bring to you. You know, Portugal was in deep financial crisis some few years ago, and then the debate went around, there's no alternative, the TINA effect. And every time I heard that, I said, well, in environment, there's really no alternative. So the first thought is, we will get to a balance between destruction and restoring, because when we really suffer, we finally act. The whole issue is how much destruction will come. What we need to avoid that we get to a really dramatic situation of only 1% of wilderness left in the world, and then we act. We should avoid that. We have, what, 35% of wilderness. Nowadays, it seems, well, the Green Deal is a step in the right direction, that's true. But now there's discussion, I've also listened to you, but in practice, will the Common Agriculture Policy follow the Green Deal? Big question mark, if you see the proposals coming from the Council and part of the European Parliament. We'll have to see about that. But my thought is, change needs what? Does it need governments to act, enlightened politicians, advanced business leaders, activists, journalists that say the real things to everyone, scientists? Well, one first thought is, people, I'm sorry, they don't change their worldviews from facts, or at least from facts only. It needs the facts, the knowledge, and it needs a key word you've used also here in the panels, emotions. Now, nature triggers emotions. And the reason we have a Green Deal is because public opinion got an interest in climate to begin with, but not only climate. If you see the demonstrations of the youth, see their panels, and you'll find nature there. And I actually think that the emotions that people get, let's say, from extreme weather events, they also get from things that are very biological, very much nature, as a sea turtle entangled in plastic in the ocean, or the knowledge that bees and butterflies are not hitting the windows of our cars when we travel any longer because they are vanishing, or koalas burning in Australian forests, or walruses falling from cliffs because there's no ice left where they stand. This, in my view, is the fundamental issue. We need public opinion support, and the public moves through emotions and facts also. I think the Green Week is here to contribute to exactly this, and I hope this event will also help the EU take the role of helping to get some leadership by example on this massive recovery of nature that we need as humans to get. Umas palavras finais só para agradecer a todos os que me convidaram e que me trouxeram até aqui, desde logo a Câmara de Lisboa, o vereador Sá Fernandes, o presidente Medina, também o Miguel Araújo, que teve um papel na organização, e à Fundação Carlos Gulbenkian. Thank you very much.
We now welcome online the Director of the Ecosystems Division of the United Nations Environment Programme, Susan Gardner.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak and provide some closing remarks today. We've heard so many extraordinary speakers already making the case for attention to biodiversity and its importance to our health, our economy, and our well-being. For example, Ruben Elano from the University of Coimbra compared global biodiversity to all the tiny parts on an Airbus jet plane. He said you'd notice only a small number of the very large parts, but that doesn't mean that you can assume that you don't need all of the rest of them. And in the case of biodiversity, the vast majority of species, we don't even know what they do. As Director Humberto Delgado Rosa noted, the speakers have highlighted two global challenges: climate and biodiversity. And he highlighted the important linkages of nature and climate change to each other, both for resilience and mitigation. We heard about the drivers of biodiversity loss, including the critical roles of food systems, with examples like deforestation due to agriculture and converting wetlands to farmlands. In the last panel, we heard, change what you eat. We heard calls to build a future for the next generation where biodiversity is protected, because young people are part of our motivation, as well as critical actors holding us accountable for our actions, as well as the actions we don't take. We know that today biodiversity is threatened like never before in human history, and the latest IPBES report shows the unprecedented rate at which plants and animals are disappearing. The statistics are alarming, and they should worry us all. If that wasn't enough, we know that there's additional reasons to be alarmed about the state of our environment. The coronavirus. Because the pandemic did not happen in a vacuum, it happened in a world where in the last 100 years, we've seen massive increases in human populations, resulting in corresponding decreases in the natural environment. The pandemic occurred in a world where in the last year, we lost nearly 12 million hectares of forest, more than 4 times the size of Belgium. And it occurred in a world where 75% of all land and 66% of oceans have been altered by humans. It's true, we don't know everything about where COVID originated, but we do know that all of this played a role. In UNEP's last report on zoonosis, it provided clear evidence that the increasing number of events caused by diseases jumping from animals to humans is undeniably linked to our destruction of the natural environment. And knowing that 75% of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotics, we see very clearly that rebuilding our relationship with nature is key to avoiding future pandemics. That's why it's so important that the environmental dimension of building back better receives the attention that it is this week during EU Green Week. In a situation where countries across the world are facing increased pressures on their public health systems and grappling with large spikes in unemployment as a result of the pandemic, it's understandable that immediate concerns for health and economy take center stage. It's understandable that governments are focused on the immediate needs of caring for our people. However, the conversations taking place this week implore us all to remember that building back better requires building back greener. It is crucial that we don't lose sight of that. It's too easy to fall into the trap of feeling powerless about the future of the planet. But in reality, we have a great deal of personal and collective power. Just as we are all part of the problem, we can all be part of the solution. Today, during the first day of the discussions on a new beginning for people and nature, we heard a call to action and we heard solutions. Emmanuel Gonzalez of the Oceano Azul Foundation showed us extraordinary images of life in the sea and reminded us that we don't have an excuse for ignorance. The science is clear. We have enough information to act, and we know what needs to be done. And earlier today, we heard praise for the European Green Deal and calls for everyone to join it. We heard enthusiasm for the EU biodiversity strategy and the post-2020 framework as roadmaps to address the drivers of biodiversity loss. And we heard calls for changing the structure of financial institutions to promote the right incentives, including better accounting for the value of natural capital. Elena Freitas, also from the University of Coimbra, called for a closer alignment of our economy with our environment, that there's a role for both public and private sector, and that governments must pave the way for biodiversity to be properly valued in economies. From panels, we heard concern and urgency, and in some cases, we heard doubt. But we heard that this is a moment of great potential, and we have momentum now, and it depends on all of us, as consumers, as voters, as contributors to raise the awareness globally of the importance of our actions. That's why the upcoming decade on ecosystem restoration could not be more timely. As Director Umberto said, kicking off next year, the decade will accelerate existing global restoration goals. It's led by UNEP and FAO, and the decade will rally investments into large ecosystem restoration efforts. Challenges like the Bonn Challenge, that aims to restore 350 million hectares of degraded ecosystems by 2030. That's almost the size of India. And restoring that amount of degraded land could generate $9 trillion in ecosystem services and take an additional 13 to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. And this can be achieved while creating jobs and strengthening our economies and building back greener. We can, in fact, move away from business as usual and embark on a new, more sustainable path. We can continue to figure out how to best rebuild our societies after the pandemic. And UNEP stands ready to support this critical work to safeguard our planet for future generations. The theme of the next UN Environment Assembly is Actions on Nature for Sustainable Development, an agenda that highlights the essential role of biodiversity for achieving the SDGs. We look forward to working with the EU and other partners to help move towards a more sustainable future. This morning, the European Commissioner for Environment, Oceans and Fisheries said, "We have no use for theoretical strategy. It comes down to a strategy that delivers." And I, for one, embrace that vision of the key word of the EU Green Week being delivery. I wish you all the success in the continuation of these excellent conversations. Thank you.
From the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity of the United Nations Environment Programme, please welcome online the Executive Secretary Elizabeth Mrema.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking everyone who delivered remarks throughout the day today for the opening of the week. The speakers today have captured the intention of the beginning for the people and nature. I also want to thank the European Union and the Commissioner for their strong support to the Convention on Biological Diversity and the action to work towards a future of life in harmony with nature. We stand here approaching the end of 2020. The year began with a phrase and call for action, Super Year for Nature. The year has proved to be completely unpredictable, with the world in a state of flux it has not seen for generations. The ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted in a blatant way the importance of the relationship between people and nature, and has also been underlined through different speakers today. It reminds us all of the profound consequences of our own well-being and survival that can result from continued biodiversity loss and the degradation of ecosystem. 10 years ago, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity gathered in Nagoya and adopted the Strategic 11-2020 and its 20 Aichi biodiversity targets. Since then, governments and actors across the world have taken significant actions to address our present biodiversity crisis. Many of these actions have had meaningful impacts, and the world's biodiversity would have been in a much worse situation were it not for those efforts. However, the efforts and actions have not been sufficient. the world has not so far achieved the Aichi biodiversity targets expected to be met by the end of this year. According to our 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook published last month, none of the 20 Aichi biodiversity targets will be fully achieved. However, 6 targets have been partially achieved. Despite these encouraging signs, for instance, half of the national targets progress is being made, but not at the rate that will allow them to be met by the end of the year. 10% of the national targets show no significant progress, and consequently, we are not presently on track to achieve the 2050 vision of living in harmony with nature and the sustainable future that we want. Biodiversity is still declining at an unprecedented rate, and the pressures driving this declining are intensifying. This threatens the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, 14 of which depends on biodiversity contribution. It will also undermine efforts to address climate change and clearly threatens human well-being. We need to act, and act now. As reminded recently by the world leaders have acknowledged this in strong support we saw during the UN Biodiversity Summit, as well as the leaders' pledge for nature, with the EU joining 76 other states stepping forward and committing to act. We have heard from the speakers today, and I'm certain we'll hear more during the coming days. So let me outline the actions that we must all take. 1. National ambitions to protect nature need to be scaled up. Mobilize all necessary resources so that the actions they achieve at national level have the scope of the global targets. 2. More work is needed to bring biodiversity in the center of decision-making in all aspects of life, of government, of our economies, so that the root causes of biodiversity loss are addressed through whole of government, whole of society approach. And finally, we need to respect and learn solutions from nature to address the multiple challenges we face in achieving sustainable development, slowing climate change, and reversing biodiversity loss. These changes are needed in every aspect of people's relationship with nature. And as we prepare for the new post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to guide actions over the next decade, we must recommit to the long-term 2050 vision that was adopted in Nagoya in 2010. It remains as ever and perfectly fits within the broader aspiration outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals. We know that the 2050 vision remains achievable, but only if we work with transformative change, including through the changing of our behavior and our choices. This clearly means a shift away from business as usual across a range of human activities. We need transitions that recognize the value of biodiversity, the need to restore ecosystems on which all human activity depends, and the urgency of reducing the negative impacts of such activity. Actions need to be taken to land and forest, sustainable agriculture and food systems, a transition to fisheries and our oceans, changes to our cities and infrastructures, and ways to support freshwater, and many others. It is also clear that we need a sustainable climate action transition that employs nature solutions alongside a rapid phase out of fossil fuel use and subsidies to it to reduce the scale and impacts of climate change while providing positive benefits for biodiversity and other sustainable development goals. COVID-19 crisis has shown us that we need urgent biodiversity inclusive, one healthy transition, managing ecosystems, including agriculture and urban ecosystems, as well as the use of wildlife, and through integrated approach to promote healthy ecosystems and healthy people. As we emerge from the COVID crisis, the world hopes that better, greener future can follow based on human societies living in a healthy planet that supports healthy lives. We cannot return to the normal of yesterday. We need a new normal where we stop environmentally destructive practices and fully recognize that biodiversity is the foundation of human health and a foundational pillar for social and ecological resilience and intergenerational equity. To help ensure that we achieve this, the ambitious post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is more critical than ever. We have learned from past experiences. Lessons learned are now being incorporated into the drafting of the framework, such as the need for well-designed goals and targets formulated in a clear, simple language and with measurable indicators, monitoring, reporting, and resources adequate to the ambition. This is critical time for humanity, but let us remember that we have before us a golden opportunity to build on the wishes of the people to work together and ensure that when we recover and build back from this pandemic, we build back better. In this regard, we acknowledge the recently adopted EU strategy on biodiversity, moving us all in the right direction. It will put Europe's biodiversity on a path to recovery by 2030, with benefits for its people, the climate, and the planet. It is indeed a major contribution to the negotiations on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The framework will be a huge step forward in helping us build the resilience we need in the face of growing environmental, health, and development challenges and ensure a healthy and sustainable future for us all. Let us take this week as an opportunity to plan for the implementation of all the promises and all commitments that have just been made and will be made in the months to come. The super year for biodiversity and nature is 24 months long, as it turns out. We continue our work into 2021 and to the UN Biodiversity Conference, plus other related conferences. Thank you very much for listening.
And now, to close the official opening conference of the European Green Week 2020, we call on stage the coordinator of the Lisbon European Green Capital 2020 and Deputy Mayor for Environment of Lisbon, José Sá Fernandes.
Hello. It's an honor that in the year Lisbon is the European Green Capital, we are hosting the Green Week this year focused in biodiversity. Thank you to the Gulbenkian Foundation. Thank you, Miguel Araújo. Thank you all. And thank you, Sofia, to help us to organize this event. I am a simple man. I listen to scientists. I listen to citizens. I was elected, and my job is doing things. I am a simple man, but Lisbon is so proud of the road we have traveled to get here. Is the green one too? Yes. Let me show you how it all began in regard to biodiversity. I'm not speaking about energy, water, or so on. I'm speaking about biodiversity in Lisbon. We created a biodiversity plan. We were one of the first cities ever to have one. We are following 23 indicators. The final report will be announced this year, and we are going to make another plan to 2030. Sorry. We are able to pinpoint the areas that need to be protected and identify the existing species. This is, of course, an ongoing process. We have clear targets to achieve. But there are things we easily can witness right now, the growth of green spaces. And more green spaces mean more biodiversity. You can see in these new green spaces, with less water that we spent before, with rain-fed I don't say this word, meadows, with natural-based solutions. Next year, with chips, Francisco can be a shepherd here in Lisbon, with restoration, with rewild spaces. In 2008, 100,000 houses in Lisbon dumped their sewage directly to the River Tejo. In that time, we did one of the city's most important works. It was redirecting that waste to the water treatment stations, whose effect is clear today on the river's biodiversity. It was a surprise then when the first dolphin returns in 2018. And we submitted the European Green Capital application to the Commission. And then we were so happy to win. We did our work, and that was rewarded by the European Green Capital jury. Not because we are the best, but because of the progress you achieved in the last 12 years, and because of our vision for the future was recognized. We did everything to prepare a great year, a great program, to be an inspiration for us and for everyone, and to learn. We began the year with a symbolic national flag made from plastic waste recovered from the ocean. On the first day, we planted 20,000 trees with our citizens. And we brought everyone together with activities, with schools, universities, NGOs, business. And we are very strong. But then something changed, not just for us, but for the whole world, changing our lives completely.
Lisboa não tem beijos nem abraços. Não tem risos nem esplanadas. Não tem passos. Nem raparigas e rapazes de mãos dadas. Tem praças cheias de ninguém. Ainda tem sol, mas não tem nem gaivota da malha nem canoa. Sem restaurantes, sem bares, nem cinemas. Ainda é fado, ainda é poemas. Fechada dentro de si mesma, ainda é Lisboa, cidade aberta. Ainda é Lisboa de pessoa, alegre e triste. E em cada rua deserta, ainda resiste.
And the pandemic called on us to listen and to learn. To listen and to learn and to resist. And to reinvent ourselves and reprogram. There's a motto that we had to follow. Those who want only what they can do anything they want. In the sense, we continue to inform our citizens in the best way we can, host the events that are still possible. We are here today, but several others you see here and had to be cancelled, such as the Ocean Conference. And also, we continue to value science advancements and the best practice in Lisbon, in the country, and in the world. We have published a book about seeds, the beginning of everything that is cultivated in Lisbon, a book of urban agriculture, what we can and should do, a book about agricultural practices for gardens in patios and balconies, a book about the richness of trees and birds of Lisbon, one about the richness of the River Tejo estuary, a children's books collections, and books about culture and environment. An exhibition that is an homage to the citizens who work at the Lisbon Allotment Gardens. We continued with the possible exhibitions to value the national territory and not look just to ourselves, always with the motto, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. One exhibition was on the Portuguese historical gardens, one on the expedition to several Portuguese natural parks, one about the wonderful Portuguese story, scientific illustrations, the parks, another of the parks and natural reserves of continental Portugal and islands. Both will be inaugurated in November. And of course, an exhibition about the great master Gonçalo Rebelo de Teles. It's a shame he isn't here today with us, because with him we will surely have the theory, but above all, the realization of ideas, and mostly the wisdom about landscape and biodiversity. We continued to work despite the pandemic. A little behind the schedule on construction, but we are expanding our agricultural parcels. Next week, we'll be handing over more 50 allotment gardens. And we continued to expand and inaugurate more green spaces, such as the rehabilitation of Botanic Garden, the Parque Ribeirinho, and the opening of the Garden of Caixajal Deposits. The Gulbenkian Garden will be extended just next year, and close by, near here, Praça de Espanha will have a new 5 hectares park. The construction is well visible right now. We also continue to value the work of the others. We did that in Ceia, Serra da Estrela, in Adanha Nova, in São João da Madeira, in Braga, and we are going to do in other places. We talk about biodiversity. You have to talk about food. Last Friday, we hosted a conference on the Mediterranean diet. But more importantly, in the theme about food, it's the knowledge about the territory. That allows us to connect agriculture with biodiversity, so that the examples given aren't only from abroad, so that the solutions are local, and so that we have the right tools to act. This isn't only about broad concepts and general ideas. People must understand that we must find answers in our territory. Thanks to the book, The Lista Vermelha da Flora Vascular de Portugal Continental, a remarkable work from the Botanical Society of Portugal that we helped publishing. Let's look at the following examples. But before, I want to give this book to Miguel, to the moderators, but Cristina have one, so to Humberto, because I think this is a very important tool to understand biodiversity in Portugal. This is a fantastic work. And I'm showing you two examples. They were given me to Professor Miguel Porto. He's a professor of botanic. This is between Serpa and Ferreira do Alentejo, with its traditional olive groves in 2006. You see what is happening with the intensive olive groves. You are shocking? Maybe you will understand better with the following pictures. The worst is what disappears: biodiversity. Linaria ricardi can be disappear for 2-3 years. It's endemic from this place. There are no place in the world with this plant. The same happens in other regions. Look, another example of the Barrocal algae. This picture is from 2017. Now is the avocado there. I see it's avocado. Even for these dramatic examples, you have to find solutions. Maybe if we try smaller explorations in square, we can better understand how to be efficient and competitive without destroying biodiversity and landscape. I'm going to show you this again. What would it be like walking in the Alentejo in spring without poppies? That's what will happen if we do nothing. This image will also disappear. So it is fundamental that there's commitment between all. The multiple areas of science must come together in the search for a solution. And they must be very clarifying. The worst they can do, and they do sometimes, is make predictions with insufficient data without scientific rigor. We can't do anything alone. We can only do it with others. And a wall with the name of all the business who are beside us. We need everyone, especially the citizens. It's my hope.
Nós tentamos começar a relacionar-nos com estes ecossistemas de uma maneira que seja mais justa, não é? Que seja justa para todas as partes, não é? Que não seja só retirar os recursos, não é? Nós temos que devolver alguma coisa. Acho que evoluir está em resgatar estes conhecimentos, nomeadamente em relação aos jardins, relacionar-nos com as plantas, cuidar de uma coisa, vê-la crescer é uma sensação incrível, não é?
Não se pode ser só paredes e material inerte. Acho que ter uma coisa a crescer dentro de casa é bastante interessante. Faz muita diferença ter o contacto com a natureza dentro de casa e nas ligações que há à casa, ter sempre o verde presente.
Estar mais tempo num sítio menos modificado por uma humana, não é? altera-nos, modifica-nos. É a melhor maneira de nós relativizarmos todos os problemas da nossa vida, não é? De colocar em causa coisas que eu levava como garantidas, de haver um mundo bem para lá do nosso.
Porque o mar tem um grande problema, na minha opinião, que não ajuda ao mar, que é o mar está sempre azul e está sempre com um aspecto que está tudo bem. O mar devia ficar preto, para termos a verdadeira noção do que está a acontecer. Não é? Uma floresta, quando morre, nós vemos que ela está a morrer, mas o mar não. O mar não aparenta ter problemas e podemos ficar um pouco enganados em relação à verdadeira necessidade de atuar rapidamente.
A bicicleta é um dos veículos mais democráticos do mundo. Tem um baixo custo, qualquer pessoa pode arranjar, qualquer pessoa pode andar, só é preciso ter pernas e consegue-se chegar a muitos lados. Ser informado das opções que existem e não ignorar essas opções já é um passo. Depois experimentar ir uma vez de bicicleta para o trabalho.
E quase que um dever de ensinar o próximo ou de passar uma mensagem. É, sem sombra de dúvida, essencial que isso faça parte do currículo escolar dos alunos. A aproximação com a natureza é uma das disciplinas que deve ter um investimento porque vai ter seguramente bons frutos no futuro e a próxima geração vai praticar de uma forma diferente que aquela, a minha, está a agir.
E acho que há muito trabalho por fazer e, portanto, qualquer iniciativa, de pequena a grande, pode mesmo fazer a diferença. Acho que temos que evoluir, mas tem que ser mesmo de uma forma consciente, e nós não podemos continuar com os nossos padrões de vida sem pensar nas consequências.
Não é uma escolha, é imperativo evoluir. E eu acho que evoluir, mas com uma consciência do que está à nossa volta e estarmos mais atentos, mais responsáveis.
Well, we are working with them. It's with them we are going to continue planting more trees. On November 14, we will plant 20,000 more trees and bushes. But we should be hopeful. It's fundamental to have hope. That is shown every time a new dolphin visits. Now it's not only one, but a family. Everything we do will be our legacy to the future generations. And that is why we need collaboration, solidarity and commitment from citizens and communities, from activists and politicians. This is the spirit of a resilient city who are planning for the future. We must all work together. And it's because that I want to offer to the Gulbenkian Foundation the symbol of Lisbon capital, European capital, green capital. It's a symbol, it's a Portuguese, como é que se diz fábrica? Factory, Bordal Pinheiro, and I have three, so you can, the three. It's a very nice piece, I think. Venham cá. Venham cá. É o Luís Jerónimo e a Filipa Saldanha. Filipa Saldanha, Luís Jerónimo.
É fantástico.
The Gulbenkian Foundation have a very strong compromise about this. So it's an honor to me to offer this.
Obrigado.
Okay.
Obrigado. Vamos pôr lá no nosso.
Thank you.
Obrigado.
and choose to involve.
So this concludes the conference marking the official opening of the European Green Week 2020. Thank you for your coming and for watching online.